One small instruction among the participants, kindly keep your mic switch off during the session. If you have any queries on the post session, you can raise. Hello, hello, Christopher sir. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Can we start, sir?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. A pleasant evening to one and all. Today I begin with a quote. Success is not a final. Failure is not a fatal. It is the courage to continuous that counts. I greet everyone for your gracious presence and express cordial welcome to all the participants for the fourth day of Faculty Development Program organized by a Department of Commerce, Bangalore University in collaboration with BUTCCM. Dear friends, as you all aware that today is the fourth day of Faculty Development Program, the topic of today's session is appropriate tools for quantitative analysis. The purpose of quantitative research is to attain the greater knowledge and understanding of the social world. The researcher uses the quantitative method to observe the situation or event that affect the people. The quantitative analysis provides empirical evidence and the support or refute hypothesis in the scientific research. And to give in detail information about the quantitative research analysis, today we have my close friend, my colleague from my own college, Christ Academy Institute for Advanced Studies, Dr. Christoper Devkumar as a resource person. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce today's resource person, Dr. Christoper Devkumar. Presently, he is working at Christ Academy Institute for Advanced Studies as an assistant professor in the Department of Commerce. He has more than 11 years of teaching experience plus 9 years of industry experience. He has worked with IBM India, Accenture as a business analytics in the various domains in the finance. His research and teaching areas includes a core finance subjects like investment management, security analysis, and portfolio management, management accounting, the blockchain technology derivatives, and the business research methods. He has published various articles on Indian derivatives market and market anomaly. Dr. Christopher is also a Board of Studies member for the various colleges in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. He is also a member of Royal Chartered Institute of Investment and Securities Body, UK. He is also a member. He had presented papers in national and international conference in the area of derivative market, blockchain, and risk management. Uh, Dear friends, when we approached him to be a part of this faculty development program, he happily accepted to be a part of this program as a resourceful person. So I am truly delighted to welcome such a worthy resource person. Sir, you are cordially greeted by the BUTCCM, and I am sure that you will enlighten the faculty members with the valuable insights on the quantitative analysis. So once again, on behalf of Bangalore University and BUTCCM and the participants, I welcome Dr. Christopher sir to take up the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Parvez. I hope that my presentation is visible.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Before I begin, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, Chief Patron Advisory Committee, the Program Coordinator, the convener of the conference or the Faculty Development Program, and the Organizing Committee, and my dear ladies and gentlemen, very good evening. First, I would like to thank Mr. Parvez for the wonderful introduction. But before we begin with the formal session, so I would like to ask a few. We need to start introspecting about why are we going through this particular session, and what would be the outcome of the session, and with the help of that, how is it going to get benefited? So how am I going to get benefited out of this session? So these are some of the introspection what each and every scholar and academicians should think about it. Now, if you see my presentation, it's very precise, and also there are no jargons as such. So I've put in my effort to make each and every one of us, because there are scholars who've just started their research journey, and there are a couple of them are experts, in the same area. So I felt that, rather than making it too high, tech information, so I tried to give as much as possible so that even each and every one of us in this room can understand. So my area of today's topic is all about so how do you choose the tools for the quantitative analysis or quantitative techniques as such. When I said this, first and the foremost is we have to go back to a little bit to understand how and where the research is starting. Because based on that only, the entire analysis or the tools needs to be finalized, and the analysis has been carried out. Data, interpretation and the data visualization takes place, and finally we come to a consensus that okay, these are some of the tools where I need to incorporate it because this is what the outcome I am requesting for, or I'm expecting, and based on that we draw the inferences. Right. So based on the inferences, we come to a conclusion that yes, this particular research is concluded in this way because there is substantial proof that, or the empirical evidence what I have collected through these tools and techniques. So that is an importance of the, this particular topic to understand. Are we, in the right track to see whether my research goes in the right way? So normally what happens here is most of the time, so we end up in asking, okay, this is my title and this is my objective and this is my tools and techniques, what we normally do it. But before even we understand that kind of a blur kind of an assumption, it is better for every research scholars here to understand what is the importance of the research process. Because every research tool or every research question, it starts from the literatures. I think everyone would agree with the same point. So I have on these parameters, I've highlighted the few areas, maybe the four parameters or the four verticals, and how the tools needs to be identified and how best your research is going to get benefited out of that. So we will start with the objectives, hypothesis, design, and last one is your identification and tools and techniques. So I'm not going to go too deep about the objectives and hypothesis because everyone should be aware of all these things. So we'll try to do some two practical exercises in this, and through that practical exercises, I'm going to derive or make you understand how the tools and techniques are in line with the objectives and the hypothesis, because these three things are very important. So when it comes to a research, startingly, to begin with, we normally ask a research question. So based on the research question, prior to that, we do a lot of meta-analysis. Right? So we do a lot of literature analysis, and based on the literatures, what we collected so far, maybe from the Indian perspective and the foreign perspectives. So the more the literature is, evident, so it is very easy for us to identify the research gaps. So what I would suggest here is, I think most of us lag in terms of identifying the literatures. So it is must for every research scholar to go enormous amount of literatures would help you to come to a consensus about how to derive the research gap. There is no number as such, because most of the time when we adjudicate some few theses, when we ask questions that on what basis you've collected the literatures only around 100 or 50. So most of the time what we get is, okay, the previous studies have collected, these many analyses or these many literatures. So based on that, I have collected my research. But on an average, if you ask, most of the time when the PhD is concerned, so we stop in maybe around 50 to 60 or 70, or rather, I would say the 100 literatures. Now, that is not the number which we are talking about. That is amount of bandwidth what we need to understand. So, am I getting the enough amount of information from both from Indian perspective or foreign perspective? So, substantiate that. Okay, this is what my research gap is all about. So, identification of research gap is very important. So if you see my presentation, the objectives would be to understand the research process in detail, and very importantly, before even we talk about the tools and techniques and other things, first we need to understand the meaning and what are the types of variables we understand, what we know, and what are the variables which we are covering up in my study, or how these variables are going to impact my study. So that is something which is very important for us. You need to introspect. A third important aspect here is to frame the objectives, and the objectives should be measurable enough. Sometimes what happens here is we do give the qualitative objectives also. Most of the time, sometimes, we end up in making the qualitative rather than quantitative, right? So every objective should be very simple, and also it should be measurable, and also it should be feasible enough for the study. Uh, Sorry for the interruption. I think participants, if you can mute your mic, maybe it will be really helpful for me. Yeah, and the last one is to identify the appropriate tools for the testing the hypothesis. Right. Now, many researchers have told me that is it mandatory that we need to have the hypothesis? Can't we do the analysis or the research just by taking the objectives in place? Of course, you can, but if there is some important technical term which is called as a systematic way of doing the analysis, right? So it is always better your objectives are then broken into multiple hypotheses. So that would be easy for us to do the testings or implementation of the testings, the identification of the tools, and also it is easy for us to interpret the data or interpret the study what we have gone through. So that is why these four important things are major before we even think about analyzing or getting into the data analysis and interpretation and so on. Right. So I think everyone is very familiar with this. Now, the research process is what I would give you more importance. The upcoming slide also will forecast, the project with a similar kind of the aspects. Now, what we are doing here is the major aspect of research process is, of course, we develop the research question, then we start with the topic, then we choose a design for this, whether what type of and research methods I need to incorporate. What are the different types of data analysis, whether it is an interview or whether it is a scheduled or whether it is a questionnaire, a structured questionnaire, so on and so forth. So I will be giving importance to the data analysis. So the data analysis is something which is very important because this is where we will end up in, getting stuck most of the time. The reason why we are not able to move forward is because I will have to go back to my previous slide, talks about where is the starting point. So first and the foremost is we need to understand from the research question. That is what I've given here very clearly, the questions and the observation. It's not just the question what we have to ask ourselves. It is very important that the topic, the knowledge about the topic what you have. So do we have that enough? So if we have, or if we come to a consensus that yes, of course I do have the enough amount of knowledge. This is where I told you that extensive amount of knowledge about the topic or about the area. That is something which is very important. I think everyone is aware of the funnel based aspect, right? So when we talk about this funnel, so this is where your question comes into picture. So this is where we narrow down to the next important aspect here is, yeah, based on this much of information, I have narrowed down to one single point, and that single point is going to be your research, question. So everything starts with the question, and everything is ends with a question. Maybe in the when you talk about the suggestions and the conclusions, maybe you can incorporate that, or where you in the most of the time, what happens here is, as and when the research progresses towards direction, you cannot anticipate that, okay, this is what my outcome will be. We cannot anticipate or project or forecast and say that my research outcome will be this. Nowhere we can say that, because that's how the research progresses, right? So the last important aspect here is your tools and techniques. When we speak about these tools and techniques, the first and the foremost questions we need to ask is not just by looking into the data set, we say that, okay, I will use ANOVA, or I will use Granger casualty test, or let me go, you go for the exponential Garch model. Rather than saying it in that way, there should be a systematic way of approach to the tech tools and techniques should be incorporated. That is where my upcoming slides will be talking about. Rather than we talk about what type of tools and what is this tool all about, first we need to understand, can I use this tool based on my research question, based on my research objectives? Will it validate my answer? That is what we need to find out. Moving ahead, yeah, the starting point for your study is maybe you would have started collected the data. You've understood what is your, the data, what is your, the sampling techniques, and all each and every component or element in your study is very important. So it's not that, okay, I decide a topic, then I design my objectives, and finally, this is what my tools and techniques I'm incorporating. Never we can start with a particular study with the topic. The topic of the study can be derived only after the extensive meta-analysis or the extensive research literature review. So that is where you will get multiple ideas about the research topics and the research objectives and hypotheses. Okay, hypothesis is a very systematic way. Let's not talk about the hypothesis. We will talk about that later. Now let's talk only about the research process and how do you collect the data first. Because when you start collecting the data, that is where most of the research scholars face a lot of issues that after collecting the data, they will realize, oh, I should have collected that rather than this. So that is the primary reason why I told that we derive the information from the past studies, or maybe the literature reviews will give you or guide you to a certain extent that, okay, these are some of the tentative tools which maybe you can be used. Yeah, of course, certain tools and certain research scholars normally they start the analysis, but later they find out that the data is exhaustive, or the data is very meager, or maybe the data is not available. So these are some of the challenges what we face in this particular area. So that is why I wanted to focus more on the data collection aspect, right? The next important aspect here is, okay, now you decided that, okay, you whether you've reviewed the documents, from the from the literatures, or maybe from the company balance sheets and so on. Now you choose what type of sampling you are incorporating. Now, when I say, so most of the time, what people say that, okay, I'm using the random sampling, but when I ask for the random table, it may not be there. So when you're choosing a particular sampling, your sampling should be very carefully, the process has to be completed, because you're taking the representative sample from the huge population. So that is something we need to give more and importance, and it is very critical before even we frame the hypothesis. So keeping these things in mind, you choose whatever sampling techniques you wanted, or sampling methods you wanted, or maybe what would be your population, or what could be a sample, and so on and so forth. Right. Now, after you begin with this particular process, after going through all the literatures, and you do a lot of surveys and a lot of study about the past analysis and so on, the next aspect here is, let's try to understand, why are we using this? Okay, why I need to use quantitative? Why can't I use qualitative? Your research can have both the components, right? So that is where most of the researchers will gain the importance of the study. When, so for example, if you're doing a research on market anomaly, the market anomalies are many things are there. Maybe you talk about your seasonal variations, or maybe day of the week, or a month of the week, a month of the year, and there are many anomalies are there. But when you choose a particular area, okay, will I, will my study will suffice just by taking the quantitative, or do you really think that I should incorporate my qualitative analysis? So this question you need to do ask yourselves as a researcher, right? So very importantly, when you are choosing a quantitative analysis, we need to identify and understand what exactly you're trying to tell to the world by your research. So that is something which is very important. Now, quantitative analysis are used predominantly by to measure the variables, right? And also it talks about the relationship between the variables. That is something which is very important. That is what every researcher is trying to do, that right? That is what we are trying to find out, whether by using these many tools will I get a substantial or a concrete solution, or a concrete interpretation for my analysis. That is what your study should talk about. Right. Now, in the quantitative analysis, it's basically with numbers, right? Say, for example, I've given some few examples here, maybe, frequencies, or means, or standard deviations, by using various software, we are going to analyze. But software, using the software, definitely, we end of the day, you're going to use the softwares. But before that, do we have the theoretical knowledge about what exactly the software is going to do? That is what we have to find out in this entire study, right? So when you speak about the importance, right? Quantitative data collection provides lots and lots of aspects, objectives, verifiable information, and the data is collected in a systematic and standardized manner. Please make note of this, because if your data is randomly collected, even if you say that I've collected the data randomly, so have you used any kind of methodologies? Maybe it could be a Latin square, or maybe it could be a random block theory, right? So based on that only you have generated. So that is why we call this as a standardized and a generalized or a systematic way of collecting the data. Now, the next important aspect is your generalizability. The results from the quantitative data, what we have collected, or when we are in the process of collection, can be generalized to a larger population, okay, making it as an effective way when you're going for a larger group of people. So sometimes your population might be very large, sometimes medium, moderate populations, or maybe to a small population. From that, we have to derive the sample size. Now, precision. So what exactly the precision is all about? It's a numerical data that allows for precise measurement of unit of analysis, which means that it providing the more accurate results than other data in the form. So that is why your data should be very precise and very concrete. So if we miss out in any one of these verticals, we may by end up by giving your unbiased or a biased aspects. Now, next aspect is your hypothesis testing. So what exactly is your hypothesis testing? Yeah, we will talk about hypothesis little later, but yes, of course, it is very important for us to understand what is hypothesis, right? It is a quantitative data collection, allows for testing the hypothesis, I have two aspects, right? So I have the dependent variable and independent variable. Am I trying to find out the relationships between this, or I'm trying to find out the variances between the two groups, right? So for that, we need to have one parameter, which is nothing but a hypothesis. I think you all know what is, we have the null and alternate hypothesis as well. Right. So we try to find out, the answers by using or constructing the very appropriate hypothesis, make sure that we don't get the test type 1 and type 2 errors. Yeah. The next important aspect or vertical is all about the comparison, right? So here, the quantitative data collections allows the data, whatever we collected, it compares, and it's also been used for the analysis. So it can be useful in making decision, and also it can be identifiable trends and patterns. Now, say for example, I just told you that what if we have, I wanted to find out during Diwali. Okay, I'm trying to give you a simple example. I'm trying to find out whether the Diwali festival has an impact on, the stock prices. If that is the case, definitely I will use for the trend analysis, or if there is any, pattern study, definitely I have to use that. So that is where it allows you to give the comparison. Replicability, the numerical nature of a quantitative data makes it easier to replicate the research results, right? Definitely, it is useful for the knowledge building, or maybe in a respective area, maybe in commerce, in management, sciences, and social science, and so on and so forth. So that is why all these five parameters or the verticals are very important. Why a research scholar is using the quantitative analysis. Moving ahead, okay, once again, I just wanted to give you a simple, we all studied this, right? So we know what is random sampling, cluster sampling, or stratified interviews, and so on. Now, why am I talking about this? The reason why we are talking about this is, if you are choosing a particular tool for your study. It could be an ANOVA, or it could be a MANOVA, or ANCOVA, or maybe a t-test or chi-square analysis. Everything is the drill down to the sampling method. So if the sampling method is inappropriate, or if your samples are not a representative sample of the population, then we end up in making a biased information or the biased results. The decision what we are going to take may not be suffice. So that is why I wanted to give this slide to make sure that, yes, if you are choosing, either it could be a cluster sampling, or whether it could be a stratified sampling. Say, let's take an example of stratified sampling, right? I wanted to find out how people from various states in India react to the investments during Akshaya Tritiya, or maybe investments during Diwali. So if that is the case, I form various clusters, cluster 1 and cluster 2. So there are two important aspects here there. So one is homogeneous, yeah, and heterogeneous. Now, we will not talk about this more about this homogeneous and heterogeneous, because when I wanted, or when I'm collecting the population, I should make sure that my population is heterogeneous, right? So I need to have all the type of people, into my study. If I'm taking only 80% of male and only 20% of female, that's a biased, information or the data what you collect. So that is the important. The reason why I quoted this particular example is to make sure that the data is normally distributed. The data is heterogeneous in nature. Again, it depends on various studies. So I just wanted to make that a particular note, that each and every type of analysis are different. So based on that, your data set is going to be very different. Right. Now, when you speak about this quantitative data, so we are analyzing the numbers, right? So all the the parameters or the variables are converted into numbers without losing the meaning of that. So that is something which is very important. That is why most of the time what we use it, we use 5-point Likert scale, or maybe 7-point Likert scale, and so on, right? So if you see the example here, I've given a very basic analysis. Example. So categorical variables like gender, ethnicity, or native language could all be converted into numbers without losing the meaning of that, right? So maybe English could be termed as one, and French or any other language could be termed as various numbers. So first and the foremost is what we are doing here is we are categorizing according to what is my research questions and what are my research objectives. So that's going to be one of the important step what we normally tend to do. And why this quantitative analysis? Now, again, once again, I wanted to repeat what for the previous slide. It depends on what type of objectives and what type of your parameters and what are your population and sample. So I just gave an example for you to make you understand how you categorize the variables and how you categorize the data. Right. Now, why there are three important things why we are using the quantitative techniques. First and the foremost is it is used to measure the difference between the groups. Now, assume that we will be talking about single sample, two samples, multiple samples, and so on. So if that is the case, if you wanted to concretely tell that, okay, I'm deriving this sample from multiple groups, and that is the case, we have to find out whether the differences. So that is why we are using the quantitative analysis. Now, for the first example, I gave that the popularity of different clothing colors or brands which are used by men and women in a particular state or particular districts and so on. Now, second, it is used to identify if your study is all about relationships between the variables, right? So I think everyone is aware of we have dependent variables, we have independent variable and extraneous variables as well. If you see the second example, the relations between weather temperatures and the voter turnout. Okay, so maybe northern part of India or northeastern part of India or southern part of India. So how weather is causing some kind of variations with amongst the voters turnout ratio. And the last one is to test the hypothesis. Okay. Now, when I say test the hypothesis, I'm talking about scientific testing, right? It's not just that, okay, we test the hypothesis based on random assumptions. No, we don't do that, right? So hypothesis about impact of a certain vaccine towards particular disease. So basically, why we are using the quantitative techniques or the quantitative analysis is to make sure there are three important states. One is your differences between the group, relations between the variables, and the test the hypothesis. Right. I hope that till now, your at most you got, where exactly your research is all about. The upcoming slide completely talks about there are two branches basically in the quantitative analysis, right? Now, descriptive and inference statistics. Let's say, for example, in your research, you might have used only quantitative techniques or descriptive statistics, or sometimes you may be using both, or sometimes you may be using, say, for example, depending on your research questions and objectives, you may construct the hypothesis, and based on the hypothesis, you may say that I'm going to use only the descriptive or statistics or inference statistics, right? So, very importantly, you can ask a question that if I'm using the name itself suggests that it's describing, okay, what are the things which comes under that. Your study can also have both descriptive and inference statistics as well, right? Now, so far we have studied about the general aspect of what is quantitative analysis and how does it works and what are the importance of this, right? Now, moving on to the little technical terms, where exactly and how do I analyze this? So for that, we need to go back to the previous, or go back to the history which talks about the sampling, right? Now, why, we are talking about sampling in this particular aspect? Now, what if I told you in the previous example, what if I take only one color? Okay, I have these many people here, and instead of me taking different colors, I choose only people with the similar colors. Then that's going to be the homogeneous, aspects, right? So if you see the representative sample, irrespective of whether the population, whatever the population might be, and of course we do have something called as universe, right? So we need to understand that also. From that, the population is derived. From the population, your sample is derived. Now, what happens if you're using a random sample? Let's take an example of random. Okay. I'm using a random block theory or maybe a Latin square. Now, when you use your random sample, this is where we talk about the scientific way of retrieving the data. So when you're using a random table, okay, maybe you can use it by system or whatever it is. We have random table, we have Latin square, so on. There are many things are there, right? So you identify one and you collect the data. So when you collect the data, that is where it is scientifically proven that yes, this is the right method, and also this will give you a unbiased results, right? Now, before we move on, now, in statistics, population is the entire group, right? I think everyone knows about this of people or animal or maybe organizations or whatever you're interested with, maybe a car company and so on. So if you're, let's take an example that if you're interested in researching about the Tesla owners in the United States, then the population would be all the owners of Tesla in the United States, right? That's going to be a massive information or massive amount of people who are involved in Tesla. So we will not be able to identify that, right? However, it is extremely unlikely that you're going to be, or you may not be able to get the all the time Tesla owners. Now, it is possible, it realistically, to be honest, that you likely only to get very few access, or maybe a few hundred people you may get, and you can interview them, or maybe you can circulate the questionnaire and so on, right? The smaller group, what you're accessing, people who are collecting the data from, that is called your sample. And that particular sample should be justifying, or that, okay, this is how I collected the data from this particular population, right? Now, once again, so population is the entire group of people you're interested in. As, for in this example, we are talking about the Tesla owners in the United States. The subset of the population is your sample size. So that is the first and the foremost important step we have to do it in the before we choose the analysis. Right. So why it is important, why the sample population, these two things are so important, because in the descriptive statistics it completely focuses on the describing the sample, while the inference statistics aims to make predictions about the population. So two keywords are there. One is, as I told you, one is the describing nature of the variable, the other one is your prediction. So I think the two statements what we spoke earlier is satisfied here, right? Right. And if we use one group of statistical methods, say for example, right, we talk about the pizza, right? So how do I slice the pizza and what are the ingredients which are there in the pizza and so on and so forth. Now, if you to investigate the slice of the pizza, okay, we are using the descriptive statistics. When you're talking about the entire pizza, we are using the inference statistics. I think my examples you can you can understand by very simple example of this pizza. Right. Now, what happens here is there are two major branches which are there in the descriptive statistics. The first and the foremost is your descriptive branch. One is descriptive statistics and your inference statistics. Let's just dig down to a certain level to understand what is the descriptive statistics all about. Yeah, your data set. Now, what type of data set are we talking about, right? So whether you can talk about a group of people, or you talk about the financial analytics of a certain organization, or maybe buying behavior of the customers, or maybe you talk about the market anomalies. Okay, the various festivals are there, or maybe you can talk about what are the various type of investors who are ready to invest in the equity markets and so on. So when you're describing a phenomenon, or when you're describing a particular characteristics, or when you're describing a particular, a problem, or that is called as a descriptive statistics. You're describing the nature of the data. So data set plays a very, very vital role in each and every one of our study. The next one is if you're talking about the predictions of two variables, right? So that is where your inference, what you're doing, you're inferring the data or the important results from two variables, right? So typically, which talks about your specific sample, right? So it is important for us. Most of the time, we don't understand this criticality that why am I giving so much importance to the specific sample and data sets? Yes, it is important for us to know the criticality which is involved in both, your population as well as in the, specific samples. Also, when you're writing up your analysis, descriptive statistics are the first step of stats. Maybe you'll cover before moving on to the inference statistics. That's what I think most of you would agree with that, right? But said that, Depending on your research objectives, maybe it could be a social sciences research, or it could be a completely a finance research. Um, you know, the research questions also differ. So there may be only one type of statistics you may use. So we will come back to that little later. So you can ask me a question that, okay, can I use only descriptive statistics? Once again, I'm telling, if that is the question, your answer is right away coming behind that. It completely depends on the research question and the research objectives. So based on that only, whether you will choose branch one or branch two. We'll talk about the branch two little later, right? So what are the type of statistics which are covered under this? Right. The first and the foremost is mean, median, standard deviation, skewness, minimum, maximum, mode, and all these things are there. Right. I'm pretty sure that all of you are aware of this descriptive statistics. I hope my presentation is visible.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
All
Yes,
right.
sir.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thanks for the confirmation. Right. This is very simple. I'm not going to talk about the Granger casualty test, or I'm not going to talk about the ARIMA or so on. But for all the test, whichever we are talking about, there are three levels of statistics are there. Maybe first, that is what we need to identify. Am I using a very small analysis or very, very basic analysis, or am I going for the moderate one, or am I going for the high-end versions like econometric analysis and so on? For every type of analysis, what we normally tend to do. So this is going to be the basics. Right. So what are the things comes under the quantitative techniques? Right. Let's have a quick look about simple practical problem. Right. So I have here. Now, if you see on the left side, I have the data set. Maybe you can talk about the weight of a person, or could be anything for that matter, right? So we have a person, 10 people are here, and weights among them. So how do you describe it? What has it been described here? That is what we need to identify. So on the left-hand side is the data set. The details are of the body weight of the sample of the 10 people, which has been very clearly given. On the right side, we have the descriptive statistics derived from the data set, right? So let's take a look at each one of them one by one, right? So we can see that the mean weight is 72.4 kilograms. So in other words, the average weight of the sample, when I say sample, I'm talking about the 10 people. So the 10 people on an average, they weigh around 72.4 kilograms. That's a straightforward, information is what we have. So next we can see that the median is very similar to the mean, which is the average, right? So 74, which that's what it's been given here. So this suggests that this data set has a reasonably symmetrical distribution. Okay, or rather, I would say that relatively smooth or centered distribution of the weights, or clustered towards the center, or it's normally distributed. These are some of the technical jargons we normally use. But looking at the numbers, I'm trying to interpret the data, what we have here. Right. Now, we know there is no mode here as such, because in terms of the mode, I don't see any mode here, because this is because each number is present only once. So there are no repetitives are there. If that is the case, then maybe we can say if 65 is there, or maybe 66 is there, maybe we can say that, yeah, there is mode in this. Right. Very important. If there were, two people, both which has a 65 or 75, whatever the numbers, then we would say that that is the mode for this particular 10 members. Right. So the next up is the standard deviation, which says 10.637. So I've just done this in the Excel for a quick reference for you, so that you can understand that. Right. So the standard deviation says 10.637. Right, or 10.6. That indicates that there's quite a wide spread of numbers. Okay, we can see this quite easily by looking at the numbers which are there, which ranges from 55 to maybe around 90, 95, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, 90 is the largest number here. Right, so which is quite a stretch from the mean, which means that they are placed, in a different areas as such. They're not clustered, or they're not very close to the average. So that is how it is. And lastly, we see the skewness. Yeah, when you say skewness, it completely talks about minus 0.22. Okay, this tells that the data is very slightly negative towards the left skewed, or negatively skewed. Okay, this makes sense when since the mean and the median are slightly different. So that is why the skewness will be affected. Okay, and also if you see here, you can see the descriptive statistics. Okay, gives us more useful information. So this is where the characteristics of the data comes into picture. So every researcher should have the basic phenomenon or a basic idea about the characteristics of the data. So it is very important. Yeah, of course, this is just a 10 numbers sample. I've just taken it for this particular presentation. There might be around a few hundreds are there. Maybe it could be larger data set and so on. So descriptive statistics is very important that, we need to know the characteristics of the data, right? Moving on to the next one is, why do we all these numbers matters in the first place? The reason is because when they help you to get both macro level or the bird's view, right? So macro level view or maybe a micro level view. Also, it gives you a big picture, okay, or the finer details about the what do I say, the data set what you have. So your data should suffice or have should satisfied a lot of things. So that is what this descriptive statistics will tell you, right? They also help you to spot potential errors in the data. So it will give you the early warning that whether your data is gives you an ample amount of information or whether it doesn't contain information and so on and so forth, right? Or whether there is high variances which you can avoid in the beginning itself. So it's always better to give you a warning sign before we proceed with the major analysis. And lastly, the third important reason why these numbers matter is because uh, descriptive statistics helps and also it's inform which inference statistic techniques you can use, or in other words, whether the data is symmetrical or normality is met. Okay, whether the data is normally distributed or whether the data has a normality pass. That's where we use Kolmogorov test and so on and so forth, right? So this is why we use the descriptive statistics to identify, to know the characteristics of the data. And yes, of course, that should satisfy all possible information. Now, when it coming back to the second branch, which is your inference statistics, right? It's all about the specific data set what you've collected, the sample, right? So that is what your small sample, what you've collected from the various populations and so on. So what exactly the inference statistics aims to make inferences about the population based on what you've collected. Okay, so we use the inference statistics to make the prediction about what you are expecting or what you would expect to find out in from the full population. By keeping the sample, we're trying to judge what's going to happen or what would have happened in the larger sample. Right. So there are two common predictions are there. The first one is your difference between the groups and the relationship between the variables. These two predictions are very important. So I've given that a simple example: height difference between children grouped by their favorite meal, gender, color, and so on and so forth. The second one is the relationship between body weight and the number of hours a person, does, exercises or yoga or whatever it is. So I think by these two simple examples, we can understand why the two predictions are very important. Right. Coming back to this, inference statistics, when it is done correctly, assume that yes, we have done it correctly. That will allow you to connect the dots and make predictions about what you expected to see in the real world, especially the population, based on what you observe in your sample data. So that correlation should be there. So most of the time we collect the sample, but whereas there's no relationship between the population, because that's why I told you heterogeneous and homogeneous itself could be a problem, right? Or if you collect only the homogeneous, there's
Joe,
yeah.
that
So
is some boy,
in very importantly, so when you
that is
test the
some boy.
hypothesis that predicts changes or the differences. Right. Now, coming back to the next one. Okay. Of course, when you're working with the inference statistics, the composition of your sample from the population is really important, right? Maybe what I would say is, in another words, if you say, if your sample doesn't accurately represent the population you're researching, your analysis could be a biased information, right? So, or what you're trying to find out, you may not find out if there is no correlation between the population and the sample size, right? Say, for example, if your population of interest is mix of 50% females and 50% male, but your sample represents only male of 80%, then you can't infer the data, right? So it's a biased data. So if that is the case, what you're expecting from your results, it may not come, right? So what are the tools which can comes under this particular branch? Okay, maybe t-test or ANOVA. So I'm not going to talk completely about what exactly it is. I think everyone knows about the t distribution, student t distributions, and also we have one tail under test and two tail and so on. Now, this type of testing is very popularly useful for understanding just to see how similar or different the two groups of the data sets are. Right. Let me give you a simple example. You might want to compare the mean blood pressure between two groups. This is a common example. We normally take it from the research methodology textbooks. I think I've also done the same thing. Right. So one that has taken a new medication and one that has not taken the medicine. To assess whether they are significantly different or the same, we are using the t-test. And definitely it is for the smaller sample size, we use t-test. Right. Now, coming back to the ANOVA. Before I move on to the ANOVA, just one point I wanted to stress here is most of the time the researchers tend to find out, okay, anyway, I have done the t-test and this is my output and this is what I am going to result. But they don't understand the magnitude of the study or magnitude of the tool. So say, for example, I wanted to nail, okay, on the wall. So I can use a hammer. Okay, that's an appropriate tool. Can I use a pencil to hammer a nail? It's not possible. So using appropriate tools and techniques for the expected or the desired output is very important, right? So that is why the tools and techniques are very, very important. It's not just the tools and techniques. You need to understand what exactly the ANOVA can do or what exactly the t-test can do. What is it that you're speaking about the variables? Are we talking about two variables? Are we talking about the two phenomenons, or are we talking about the dependent and independent variables? Right. So that is what we need to understand. Based on that only, we can suggest, yes, I think I need to use the t-test based on these grounds. The grounds should be very, very clearly articulated and done the analysis. Of course, we know what is correlation and what is regression and so on. So in correlation, basically analyzes the relationship between two variables, where dependent variables and independent variable, right? There are many things which are there. Maybe say, for example, you can say that, okay, when I say positively correlated, negatively correlated, or there is no correlation, what am I trying to derive from this? Say, for example, a salary, my spending is dependent on my salary. Okay, fine. It may be correct or it may not be correct. So how can I say that as and when my salary increases, my spending also goes up? It's not possible sometimes. So if that is the case, what is that? How is your answer or how is your analysis going to be correct? So that is where you use a high level of analysis or tool packs to find out, yes, this is the primary reason why there is no correlation. When we talk about the regression, so when you say, for example, the best fit analysis. So when you do the best fit analysis, why are we using? So we are trying to find out the cause and effect relations. Now, if you see in the example what I've mentioned here, does the one variable actually cause the other one to move or not? Or do they just happen to move together naturally? If that is the case, what we do? So if that is the case, what we are implementing when we are using the regression analysis, they may move naturally. If that is the case, then the cause and effect may not be appropriate. I think I hope I'm making myself very clear in this. So when we're talking about this, how best you can predict and say that, okay, this is going to be the best fit line. And this is what the regression is identified. And this is what the cause and effect, from between the independent and dependent variables. So that is how we normally judge, right? So let's take a simple, math here. Okay, I've just given you a scatter plot of the correlation between two variables and height and weight of maybe 10, 15 members or maybe 50 members here, right? So as I mentioned earlier, there are just the handful of inferral techniques. Okay, so there are many, many techniques which are there. Right. Now, each technique or the statistical method has its own assumptions. Now, that is where most of us we tend to forget that. So assumptions and limitations are there for every statistical techniques what we normally use. So for example, some methods only work with the normally distributed, which is also called as parametric data, right? So while other data methods are designed specifically for the non-parametric. So we as the research scholars, we need to understand whether my data will come under the parametric test. Should I use the parametric test tools or should I use the non-parametric data, right? Now, And that's exactly why, in order to take that stand, we need to have something to prove. That's where the descriptive statistics are so important to finalize whether I'm going for the in descriptive, am I going for the parametric test or am I going for the non-parametric test, right? So they are the first step to knowing which inference techniques you can use it and which you can't use in your study. Now, moving on to the next important, how do you choose the right tool for your analysis? There are two important things which are there, or normally I would say two factors, right? Level of measurements. Normally we say the Likert scale. We have ordinal, nominal, and no, there are four methods are there. So are we talking about the Likert 4-point or 5-point Likert scale, or are we talking about based on the research questions and hypothesis? Okay, so this is where we need to identify. So the first thing what you need to do, or what we need to do, is consider the type of data what we have collected. Okay, or if in case if you are going to consider, okay, this is what my data set is all about, so then we can choose that, yes, then I can very clearly say that, okay, I'm going to measure my entire data set by using the 4-point Likert scale or 5-point scale, by using the nominal, ordinal, and so on. So this completely, again, so can you see that relativity of what we're talking about? So in the first slides, we talked about the research question, and we also spoke about the research process. This is directly connected to that. So if we make mistake there, then definitely all the other processes going to be lagging. Right. So that is an importance of starting from the research question. From the research question, what are we doing? How are we going forward? And selecting the type of techniques. Okay, I'm going to go for stratified random sampling, or maybe a cluster sampling or snowball sampling, whatever the sampling what we're talking about. So each and everything should have a consensus, and you to have a justification. If the justification is not being provided, then it is very difficult whether we don't know whether we will be using the branch one techniques or branch two techniques. More than that, we will not be able to identify whether it is a parametric test or whether should I use a non-parametric test. Now, assume that if you've taken a data set, let's take an example of a data. I wanted to analyze the Diwali effect on the stock prices of Infosys companies, right? So when I take the data, so I collected the data and I wanted to use the unit truth test, okay, or the augmented Ducky-Fuller model. Now, until unless if I don't know the characteristics of the data set, assume that it is a parametric test or a non-parametric test. So I use one of the non-parametric test, and where the data is satisfying the parametric test. So the whatever the inferences what I'm deriving from the analysis is wrong. Or even if I use the Granger casualty test, or when I say I'm using the Kolmogorov test to find out the normality of the data. If the normality of the data is not there, why would I use the parametric test? Then definitely I have to. So that justification should be very clear. So if you have the justification that you have used this particular technique because it does not satisfy that assumption, that is why I have used this parametric test, non-parametric test. Don't worry about that. Okay, oh no, I thought I will be using this parametric test, but unfortunately I'm ending up in using non-parametric test. That's absolutely fine, because that's you are projecting what exactly your data is all about. We cannot change or tweak or tamper the data what we have already collected. So that is why the pilot study is conducted, to make sure that, yes, I am in the right track. This is what my plan of action is. And these are my no, sampling techniques. This is what my sample, and in the sampling, there should be that sampling errors should be avoided. Extraneous variables should be avoided. Yeah. Then also, then my sample size has normally distributed. If the normal distribution, or if the normality of the data is not there, that is where the problem comes and says that, okay, yes, because of this, we are not able to go forward. Most of the time, many researchers are still stuck in quite a few things. Right. Before we move on to the the upcoming slides, quickly I just wanted to tell about statistical packages. Right, we do have packages. It's not that we don't have. Now the question is, some of the research scholars normally say, "Sir, can I use Stata for this? Can I use eViews for this?" It's not about whether which type of data tool package you are using. It's all about what is your data all about. Right? When you talk about, okay, sir, I wanted to use Granger casualty test. Why are you using that? So when you say that, okay, no, I think I wanted to find out the effect of this. If that is the case, regression can be used because you're trying to find out Diwali has an effect on few things. If that is the case, then find out the regression itself. Why would you use the Granger casualty test? Because there are certain places where the normality is not met. Okay, so in that is the reason why we are using several Wilcoxon's test. Okay, it could be a run test we need to perform, or if the data set is small, or if the data set is large. So what is the methodology? So how is that you are trying to find out? These are the justifications we can project it, right? Moving on, maybe nowadays people started using the interdisciplinary kind of, analysis tool packs, right? Maybe we have SAS, we have Mathematica, we have Python, we have MATLAB, we have Minitabs. There are many types of tools are there. Now, before even we, fix on, okay, let me use SPSS, or let me use MATLAB. Now, why is that you wanted to use that, right? As I said, your analysis should be in three levels, maybe a low level, a moderate level, and a high level. So when you're talking about that, so the same results can be portrayed in three different levels. That is why we are using the complicated or the complex data structures to identify, okay, when I wanted to find out, when I'm creating an algorithm for artificial neural networks, I'll just give you a simple example. I wanted to predict or find out whether a particular finance model is better or not. So if that is the case, I can use an artificial neural network by using the back propagation model, right? That's very simple. So I just wanted to find out, okay, model A and model B, which is better? So I need to substantiate that with some kind of tool. So which tool I'm using? So I can use MATLAB to find out the artificial neural network by using the back propagation. So the knowledge towards that, you need to have that. It's not that, okay, that I'll just use Python programming by using a numpy, or a quandl method. So these are just for your understanding about why, what are the tools and techniques which are available, or which are the statistical tool package where you can use, right? Um, as I said earlier, even the finance, even the commerce and management, students, I mean, research scholars are using multiple things. I just gave you a very handful of information about Python programming and mini tabs and so on. But there are multiple things are there, right? So very important when you choose a particular tool. There are three important things every scholar should be very clear about it. First one is testing against the value, relationship between variables, and difference between the groups. These are the basic fundamental aspects. Okay, you need to keep in mind. So there are two important things are there. Variables are there, dependent and independent variables, which is also called as the predictors and the outcomes. Are you testing this? Are you trying to find out the value of this independent and dependent? Are you trying to find out the relationship between dependent and independent? Or are you trying to find out the differences between the samples which we are collected under the dependent and independent? So this is what your purpose of the study is all about. Based on this only, the statistical techniques can be incorporated. The second parameter or the vertical is the level of measurements, as I think everyone knows about this. Okay, we use the Likert scale and we say that, okay, I'm measuring the particular data, or I'm quantifying the data based on the nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio scales, right? And the last one is um, uh, you know whether it is one variable. I think there is a repetition there, I'm so sorry for that. It is one sample, it's a level of sample, that's the title. It's, was it one sample, or is it two sample, or is it multiple sample? So if we are not deriving this, or if you're not aware of this, then it becomes very difficult for us to move to the next level to choose whether it is a parametric or non-parametric test, right? So this is what the points needs to be understand. So this is my last stage. Okay, this is the last stage where I decide, okay, this is my data set, but based on the research data, okay, this is I've chosen for the parametric test. Okay, but parametric tests are very powerful compared to all the others, right? Now, very importantly, as I mentioned in the previous slides, every statistical techniques will have assumptions. If the assumptions are met, we will use the parametric, okay, or non-parametric, vice versa. If it is not, then we will have to change the tools and techniques. It's not that you use all the techniques, tools, and techniques and say that, okay, I've used 10 different techniques. No, it's not required. So as long as the particular tools and techniques or the data set matches the requirements or matches the assumptions, we will go with whatever the techniques. Even if you talk about only one or two tests, Okay, that's going to give you a complete information because you're directly after analyzing the descriptive statistics, you're deciding that, okay, let me go for the higher level. That is where you decide I'll go for the parametric and non-parametric tests, right? Now, very importantly, there are four important things are there when you're going for all these high levels, right? First one is the random selection of the sample should be identified. Okay, whether you've chosen it, so whether the data is coming selected from the random basis. Very importantly, the normality of the data. Most of the time, what happens is when you collect the data, the normality of the data may not be met. If that is the case, that is where we choose that, when the normality of the data is not met, then the assumptions are not met. Then if that is the case, we will have to change the methodology. Then third important is equal variance of the data from multiple groups. So when you're taking multiple populations and when you're deriving the samples from multiple population, the variance should be meager. If it's not there, then it's a biased information, right? And last one is your interval and ratio level of outcome variables. So we need to see the outcome variables, which is your independent variables, right? So how far they are varying from each other, right? And one last aspect here we are talking about here is how do you choose? There are three basic things which are there, right? Are we looking out for the relations, which is very clearly articulated here? So if you're looking out for the relations, what type of data set you have? Whether it is a categorical variable, this is what I said. Based on the time factor, we stopped only with categorical, so we did not speak about the continuous variables. If the data set is contains the continuous, then whether it meets the assumptions. Can you see here? It meets the assumptions. Yes. If the parametric assumptions are met, you don't need to worry about it. Point blank, yes. If it is yes, go for the correlation. If it is not, then you go for the Spearman's correlation. This is a fundamental factor. If it is a categorical variable, then we will go with the chi-square analysis, right? So like that, these are the very, very essential type of data sets what we are talking about. Is when you talk about this, um, you know, when you talk about the continuous variables, okay, number of the groups which are there. What is your sample size? Is it one? Is it two or multiple? So how many independent variables are there? So based on that, say if you see here, there are two independent variables are there. That is where you go for use ANOVA table. If it is one independent variable, then maybe we can use one-way ANOVA, or maybe we can use the Kruskal-Wallis test. Okay, both are going to give you the similar kind of the results, but the only thing is the interpretation when you draw, we need to be very, very clear about, okay, this, because there are multiple independent variables are there, I have used this particular measurement, right? Similarly, when you talk about the predictive outcomes, okay, so if it is a categorical variable included in the predictive outcomes, right, or whether it is a continuous aspect is in data set is continuous, then how many independent and dependent variables are there? All right, on an average, okay, on an average, when you talk about these tests, right, the variables play a very important role. Most of the time what happens here is the extraneous variables will always come inside that when a dependent independent. You cannot say that my data set does not have any extraneous variables. We do have that. So how am I going to avoid these? How am I going to get out of that? So and based on the pure analysis, okay, pure independent and dependent variables, I have done this. So that is why it is very significant. So your research becomes very significant if your study meets all the criteria. Okay. Uh, Very importantly, it's not about this is very basic structures. But if you wanted to go, say for example, no, can I use ordinary least square? Can I use many research scholars have asked me, can I use the Garch model, or can I go for P Garch model, or can I go for T Garch model? Can I go for I Garch? Can I go for Arima and so on, right? So all these things, all these kind of an advanced econometric models start from the very basic thing, which is nothing but your research question. So in a nutshell, that what I wanted to tell you is, irrespective of whatever the data set or whatever the analysis you are dealing with, first and the foremost is understand the importance of the variables and understand the question. So your research, starting from the research process, collecting the data, or I would say that much earlier, go back to the literature review, start plotting what are the tools and techniques, why they have used, and what are the type of the data sets, what they have used. So based on that only, we can come to a consensus that, okay, this person has used this particular tool because this has to satisfy this criteria. So that is why we normally use this techniques. I hope with the help of this, minimum time, I think I've covered quite a few pieces of information about the quantitative techniques and so on. Maybe the technical sessions can say, okay, how to use these tools and techniques. That could be another sessions maybe you guys can plan in future, that okay, if I'm using the ANOVA, so why I'm using ANOVA? What is the advanced tools and technique for ANOVA? Or how do I use techniques, or how to do the analysis based on SAS or maybe Python programming and all. So those are just a machines which which has the codings. End of the day, the interpretation, when you as a researcher try to interpret this, so we need to understand what are the things which are important in that and what to be eliminated. If that is the case, then identifying the research tool is not a very complicated process. So once again, I hope that my piece of information here and there would be good for the people who have just started the research. Maybe in near future, maybe you can think about coming up with multiple techniques. Yeah, thank you. And once again, I thank you for the opportunity given by the organizing committee, especially the Bangalore University. And thanks to my friend Mr. Parvezullah for inviting me for the session. Thank you very much. So if there are any questions, maybe quickly we can take some questions.
Thank you, sir. Really, your session was very fabulous. You have explained the entire concept in a systematic manner. Now, the window is open for the questions. If the participants are having any questions to ask with the resource person, you can go ahead. You'll be having 5 to 10 minutes.
Normally I can only ask the questions maybe. So sometimes one of the question which came very recently today is one of the session is that is it mandatory that I need to use an econometric tool? Say when people are writing papers for Scopus and ABDC journals, is it mandatory they use the advanced econometric models? It's not about whether you're using econometric models or not. The truthfulness, then also the systematic way. If that is there, definitely the paper will get published in the Scopus. That is point number one. Second, yes, now most of the tier one institutes, they are coming up with econometric models, and also they are coming up with AI and ML. Yes, it is important. At least once econometric models, maybe we can use it. And you substantiate that, definitely the paper will get published in the Scopus. Yeah, more than that, the idea makes a lot of sense, because the new ideas, the new thought process comes, and but that process is converted into a research paper, and yes, it's gonna be your papers, you can see it in the ABDC.
Any other question from the participants end?
Anyway, I have my email ID. If anybody wants to, maybe to have any questions, maybe you can just drop an email. Maybe I'll get back to you.
Right, sir. So now
Right.
we'll conclude the session. Gratitude is not only the greatest of virtues, but the present of all others. Now, on behalf of Department of Commerce, Bangalore University, and BUTCCM, I would like to extend my gratified acknowledgement to today's speaker, Dr. Christoper Devkumar, for spending a precious time with us. We truly appreciate for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Truly, your session was extremely insightful and provided a valuable insight that definitely helped all the academicians and the research in their research work. And we hope you will consider us again in the future engagement, sir.
Sure, we will do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Finally, I thank all the academicians, research scholars, and participants for your time and effort in attending the FDP and making it a grand success. Once again, I thank everyone to be a part of this program. A big thank you to all, and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
எல்லாமே ஒரு தியரி தான் எதுவுமே 100% இதான் பக்காவா ஒன்றும் பண்ணல, எல்லாமே தியரி தான். 60, 70